Okay.
So, Disha, where and when were you born?
So I was born in Tiptur, which is in Karnataka, which is a state in India. I was born in 1998 on September 7th.
So
I'm
that
21 years old.
does that makes you a Virgo, and from what I know of Virgos, they pay attention to detail. They have kind hearts. They're sensitive. Does that describe you? What words describe you as a person?
Yeah, I think some of those would definitely describe me, and I think I'm very organized, and I'm a perfectionist. I wish I wasn't, but I am.
My little tool for that is to ask about every task. If there's a gauge from 1 to 100, how perfect does this task need to be done? If this is
Hmm.
100, great. If this is a 50, well then let's give it 50% of your energy. So that's something that can be of use to perfectionists. Where are you in school? Are you finished with university? What's your educational background?
So I graduated from university last year. So
Yay!
I'm
Congratulations.
Thank you so much. Yeah, so I'm currently working with an enterprise called Good Milk. We work on making plant-based food accessible and affordable across India, and we're working with a few NGOs to make that happen as well.
And what did you major in? What was your course of study in university?
Interestingly, it was business administration with a specialization in finance, which is interesting because I really don't like capitalism, but yeah, that's what I did.
So why did you do it?
Honestly, my parents really wanted me to do it, and I didn't really have another choice, so that is why I did it. But I do want to do a master's in conservation because I think I really like conservation, and I'm looking into that.
As a kind of an end note, I have a Facebook page called Sexism in Indian Universities, and it
Hmm.
started because a woman I knew from another book found that there
Hmm.
are really double standards. Like in the dormitories, the hostels and universities, girls can't go out, whereas boys can. And I wondered if that's changed or if there's still much more protection and limitation on young women students.
I don't think it has changed in a lot of cities because even today, in a lot of hostels, women are like they're subject to a shorter uh, curfew. I mean, like a more immediate curfew, while men have a longer curfew. But again, at the same time, this is also because it isn't very safe in India. But yeah, it definitely doesn't justify this. I don't think anything would justify the discrimination. But yeah, it definitely prevalent even today.
And is there any kind of student activism around those that discrimination against young women? Is there any kind of movement to change it, or everybody is just that's the way it is?
There's definitely a lot of, I think the Me Too movement really took off in India. There isn't one movement working for it particularly, but it is definitely a constant thing. Everyone works together to protest, at least the women. So that keeps happening because sexism is very prevalent even today, and it's very obvious in the Indian society, not just in schools and colleges, but even in your own families. So yeah, women do stand up and fight against it, but it's definitely going to take a while because the Indian society, like a large population, is controlled by adults who I think are the reason for sexism, like old men. I don't want to blame and categorize all old men, but definitely a large chunk of it.
Right. There's active women's studies programs in throughout India. Did you have a women's studies program at your university?
No, we do not have a women's studies program in my university.
Mm. Um, And not one course like women in history or women in religion or women writers. Nothing like that.
Oh, we've never, I don't think in my entire education we've ever
Oh,
had a course focused on women solely. Ever. I didn't even know this was a thing, so I'm very surprised to hear that.
wow. I think that in the US now every university has a women's studies program. And also ethnic studies, and it includes sexual preference and all kinds of intersectional issues. And in I also, when I've studied Indian feminism, it was hard to find like a national feminist group. Like in the U.S., there's a National Organization of Women or the National Women's Political Caucus. Do you look to a national group to lead the charge for feminist issues?
Uh, I I don't think we have a national group at the moment to lead feminism issues in India, at least not ones I'm aware of. They definitely are not in popular media for their work or so like I mentioned previously, it's women do stand up for each other, which I think is great. So every time there is an issue, women always stand up for each other and they support each other. But there is no movement dedicated to it. Like I would say, Fridays for Future is that dedicated to climate justice. I wouldn't say there is a movement like that for feminism in India.
It seemed like the issue that got the most public outrage was the college student in Delhi who was raped and assaulted on a bus and thrown off the bus. That had led to protests and all over India, and I think it made the laws stricter on rapists. Has there was What's been the outcome of that famous incident?
So they were all hanged. So there was capital punishments for the offenders. But I personally, it hasn't made the situation worse because I don't think capital punishment scares anyone. It again inserts the point that if we hang someone, it will solve the problem instead of addressing the root cause, that is patriarchy. So I don't, because immediately after, like a few days after they were hanged, there was another incident again in Delhi where a group chat was discovered with boys talking about underage women and their pictures were leaked, and it was very uh, disturbing. And these were underage children talking about other underage women. So it was very disturbing. So I don't think capital punishment is the way to go. I think we really need to address the root cause, that is patriarchy, and that is we're made to believe that men somehow control the large populace.
Well, yeah, they do. Um, so another issue that I hear a lot from Indian women is street harassment, being touched on buses and in public transport, and comments. That's not a problem unique to India. It happens around the world, but feeling safe on the street seems to be something that's of concern.
I would definitely agree because I don't know any woman who hasn't been harassed on public transport. I personally have been several times, and it's become so normalized that I think once when my sister got harassed on the metro, and when she like came and told her mother and me, uh, I think my first thought was, okay, why is she freaking out so much? And I was like, oh wait, it's her first time, and that's when I realized there was a problem internally as well that the society had normalized it so much for me that I questioned why she was freaking out because this happens so often and it's very, very normalized. And a lot of people, because there are other things happening, they don't consider this serious enough when it is a very serious issue. So it's very, very common, and I don't think I know any woman who hasn't been harassed on public transport. And like I went to a women's college and I went to an all-girls school. So I think I would definitely say I know a lot of women, so it's very scary.
Oh yeah. There was a wonderful video clip that went viral. I think it was two sisters maybe, and they were harassed on a train or a bus, and they took a belt and they beat him and they fought him off, and that went viral. People were really happy that those young women stood up to the perpetrator.
I don't think I watched the video honestly because I'm not sure if it went viral in India, and I'm not sure when this was, but I have
Uh,
not watched the video.
yeah. Oh, okay. It was a few years ago. Um, what about we're talking about women's issues. So one is safety on the streets, violence against women, and these are global problems. What about early marriage, child marriage? I know the society officially opposes it, but I think it still happens, especially in rural areas. Is that correct?
Yes, it's very common for early marriage. I know women as young as 8 years old, 9 years old who have been married. So there was someone working in construction near my house, and she once mentioned that she was married so young that she doesn't remember when she was married. Uh, so if I think that's sufficient to say that she didn't have her memory power back then, so it was she was so underdeveloped. So it must be like when she was 3 years old, or something. And it's very common. It's a very common practice. A child marriage is very prevalent, and even though there are laws against it, it's still very common. And in a lot of cities, the local authorities do encourage it because what I heard from her was that local authorities in her area, where child marriage is the norm, is encouraged by local authorities. So if the I mean, if the law systems in the local areas don't act, and if it goes unreported, I don't know how we can take action against it.
And what about dowry? I know that's not supposed to happen, but still, the grooms ask for dowry payments.
Yeah, dowry is again a very, very common practice, and there are laws against all of this. But again, it is very common. Dowry, sati, child marriage, uh, all of these are very, very common practices, and even domestic violence. I think Indians have been so trained, like it's ingrained. It's very hard to leave your husband and go because you don't educate the woman when she's young. So you make her dependent on the husband for her daily requirements. So there's no source of income, even if she wants to separate from the family. And essentially, if she does do it, it is frowned upon in the society. And there are very high. So there's so many cases when the family kills the woman, and it's called mercy killing for the incident, and it's completely acceptable because even though there are laws against it, it's completely overlooked,
So,
and it's very dangerous. And these are very common practices, which makes the woman stay in the marriage, even if there is domestic violence, even if there is rape in marriage. Uh, so these are very common practices.
so the mercy killing is done by the young woman's own parents because she comes home to escape violence or whatever.
In a lot of cases, yes, the mercy killing is done by the own family of the women because they feel like she's brought dishonor to the family, and it's completely acceptable to kill her for that.
Oh boy, we have a long way to go, huh? Um, Another current issue is the pandemic sent thousands of migrant workers from urban areas back home. And I've read that, hundreds have been killed on the highways and they're just walking many, many, many kilometers away from the cities to go back to the rural villages. Is anything being done to help them?
So a lot of migrant workers left the city to go back home. because initially there was no transportation or financial. Okay, firstly, there was no financial support in the city provided for them, so they had to go back home where they feel like it's safer. Also, in the cities, the coronavirus cases started increasing, and with housing facilities for them being very poor and temporary, they obviously had to go back to their houses. But the government did make an effort to financially support them in the city and even to go back to their houses, which is why they started working. And they were even mistreated when they were trying to go back home. They were sprayed with chemicals to sterilize them, which in very inhumane conditions. Uh, and now they're trying to now some they've really they've started public transport between cities and states. So now they're helping them get home. But even in a lot of places, it's still not opened up. So they're still walking home, and it's miserable because, like, and it's even in now it's in very inhumane conditions because today morning I read in the newspaper that a few people were trying to cross from some one part of the state to another, and they sat in the back of a truck with dead bodies from who had people who had died from the coronavirus. And I think that's definitely very dangerous, and I don't think that's conditions that anyone should be subject to, but that was the reality, and it was very scary to read.
Right. The Modi government, the PJB party, seems like it's pretty reactionary. I mean, Hindu nationalism, conservative attitudes about women's roles. We don't even hear that he has a wife. Why did Indians elect him and re-elect his party?
Um, so the Modi government is a very right-wing party, and I think one thing he did right was uh, he was able to make people understand about his aims, and he really convinced the larger population that Muslims, for some reason, are somehow they're doing something wrong, and and the press is really controlled by him. So a lot of the main press is right wing. So my parents support him. I don't. Um, and everyone who doesn't support him is silenced in the most horrific way, and it isn't shown by like the mainstream press. So you need to go to alternative press, and even the alternative press was sued for publishing what they did. So there's next to no freedom of press in India.
Wow.
So he's really convinced everyone that what he's doing is good, which is there's so many questionable things about his governance, not just in terms of equal rights, but also for environmental rights as well as human rights. Human rights have been we have been slipping down on the human rights index.
His primary goal seems to be economic growth, and it doesn't matter the consequences as long as there's economic growth.
Which is interesting because we have been slipping in GDP since his governance. Uh, so that's also very concerning. And yeah, his governance in general is concerning, but majority of the population does support him.
This is a footnote again. I was kind of amused when Trump and his wife came to India, and they had a huge rally, and she wore a white suit. And I think someone should have told her that in India, widows wear white. Did anyone comment on her wearing white?
I don't think so because widows wearing white in India is also subject to religion, and since we have so many religions, I don't think that was people were offended by that. At least not many mainstream medias covered her wearing white as an issue. What everyone was concerned about was the amount of people that were used for the rally. And so while Trump came to India, there was a lot of human rights violations that was going on in the capital of the country. and students from one particular college that was predominantly Muslim were being attacked, and it was really concerning. So the attention was split between that, but all the mainstream media covered Modi's welcome to Trump, which he spent a lot of money on, a lot of money that we don't have on, and that we could have used for other things. So there was a lot of commentary on that instead, and there was a huge human rights violation and attack on Muslims, especially Muslim youth, in the capital of the country. So the attention was given to that.
Hmm. It's interesting how those autocrats like each other and back each other up. You know, they praise each other. They're and they're so undemocratic. It's kind of sad that this is a recent trend. How did you get interested in climate change and get involved with the movement?
So my grandparents are actually farmers, and I think I couldn't really put a finger on it, but while growing up, one common complaint from them was that the groundwater levels are decreasing and rainfall has been very erratic, and these are two of the things that they depend on. And initially, I didn't think much of it, but my grandparents' siblings are also uh, who live a little further away in the city started getting affected by it. Uh, that's when I really noticed because these people were a little further away from the city, a little away from the agricultural land, so I didn't understand why they were getting affected. And after a while, only in university did I finally understand that, like, we always knew climate change was the thing, but we, so climate science is non-existent in India. It's like, at least not in public schools, which is where I went. So we didn't learn about it, and unless you go to a really privileged IB school, you won't learn about climate science. And a very small chunk of India goes to it, and the majority of the population, I would say at least 80. I don't want to make percentages. Actually, that's not based on data. So at least a majority of the Indian population goes to public schools where climate science is not taught.
Hmm.
So I didn't know about it until I reached university, which is when I realized a lot of the problems that my grandparents are facing, and even me, even at home now, like in my locality, we have a lot of days where like the water, it we're not like starving without water. I mean, we're not without water, but we can see how the water levels have gone down because all of us use are heavily reliant on underground rainwater, and this has decreased over the years. And my city, especially, has began to have really erratic weather conditions, which we didn't have before. And recently, uh, a study came out by a very reputable institution that we will be out of groundwater by the end of this year, actually.
Wow.
Yeah, so
The city will be out of groundwater.
yes, but luckily it was debunked. There was some issues with the study. Apparently, it was extrapolated. The data was extrapolated a lot, but it definitely is going to happen in the next 3 to 5 years, which isn't very far away when you consider it. And we're already seeing the effects of it. And even now, as I'm speaking to you, there's a cyclone hitting the eastern part of India, and this was only amplified by climate change. Initially, it was considered a cyclone, a category 5 cyclone, and now it is a category 3. So I'm so glad it has lessened because it's very hard for us to be fighting the coronavirus as well as the cyclone.
Oh
And
gosh.
millions of people had to be evacuated because of it. So yeah, it's a very real issue, and the only reason that people don't understand it is because there was no climate education. So they can't pinpoint the cause. They just know it's happening, and they think it's natural occurrence because that's what government and mainstream media has made us believe.
Hmm. I know that for a while a problem has been farmers committing suicide because they can't pay their debts, and so they think the only way to help the family is just end their lives. That's so sad.
Yes, it is very sad, and it's a very common practice because not just this is unrelated to government loans. There are a lot of loan sharks because crops keep failing and they don't have income sources, so they keep borrowing more money. And I mean, the loan sharks obviously have to. So there's no way to bail them out. I mean, I'm not going to blame the government on this because the government has actually implemented quite a few uh, bank regulations where loans are granted to farmers. So they did do a good job on that. I'm not going to lie, but at the end of the day, it does have a lot of rules that and a lot of documentation that farmers might not have, which is why it's still a very common practice.
Hmm. I read that there's a new form of ID where you don't have to have a birth certificate. They have something that's from your iris or from your eye or something. They have a way. What is that? A new form of ID for people who don't have paperwork, so you can get
It,
loans.
it was the Aadhaar card, but there are different rules on getting the Aadhaar card. Uh, you do need the iris for that, but the rules are different for different sectors of people. A lot of yeah, you can make an Aadhaar card without a birth certificate, but again, it isn't very accessible. So I was speaking to a lot of indigenous activists who weren't able to make an Aadhaar card simply because they don't have access to internet, and the government authorities exploited them for their lack of knowledge about it and charged them a lot when it's supposed to be a very it's not a free service, but the payment for it is very minimal, but they charge them a lot more for it. So
Hmm.
there's a lot of exploitation because there's lack of awareness from the marginalized communities.
Hmm. Um, the India has reservations. It has like what we would call in the States affirmative action, where people in scheduled tribal areas and lower castes or outcasts are supposed to have a way to move forward. Is that working or not working?
So there's not enough data to show the results of it. Uh, but what I can comment on is that a lot of marginalized communities are exploited upon because of their lack of knowledge, and a lot of them don't have access to the internet, which is supposed to be a basic right. Uh, so they're really exploited. So I'm not sure if I can comment on that because there's not enough evidence on the topic.
Hmm. Um, so when you realized the problem with climate change, what organizations or groups did you find to work with? Because it's really hard to do much as an individual. You kind of need a group.
Yeah, I understand. So initially, I wasn't sure what to do, and I was just looking on the internet about how youth are organizing. I think that's when the climate strikes really took off around the world. So I started the Fridays for Future chapter in my city along with two other women actually. So we were women initiated from the start. Even today, I think except for two of our working members, everyone are women. Um, so a lot of our members are women, so I would definitely say women are leading the climate change. I mean, the fight against the climate crisis. And then we started working with other local organizations who are already working on the climate crisis.
How did you know about Fridays for Future? And do you work with some kind of international support group? I mean, so that you stay connected, like in deciding on a strike date or that kind of thing.
Yeah, so initially, we started the Fridays for Future movement. We weren't aware, I mean, we knew the rules to start it, and so we knew we were abiding by them when we started it. Once we started it, and we enabled other cities to start chapters as well, and that's when like Fridays for Future India was formed. We reached out to the international teams for support, and currently I work with international strike support. So we do work on an international level to share information, resources, and basically anything that will all help us together. We do Fridays for Future. We all decide on the dates for the strikes together before we publish it. So everything is decided together by a lot of countries.
Was your city the first FFF chapter, or were there other cities that you learned from, or were you the first?
So we were the first. But simultaneously, Mumbai and Delhi also started. Because when we were trying to start, we didn't want it to be just in one city, right? So we started it with Mumbai and Delhi. So all three of us started around the same time.
And did you have friends that you knew there already and said, "Hey, friend, you're in Mumbai, work with us on starting FFF," or how did you get the contacts in Mumbai and Delhi?
So initially, even when I was searching for other people to start, I didn't know anyone who would want to start this. But a few of us, a few friends were also posting about the climate strike that's happening all over the world. So that's how, through a mutual friend who had posted that someone was looking to see if this is possible in India. That's how I connected with Karen, who was one of the who had the idea in the first place uh, to start the chapter in Bangalore. She was also from my city, so that's how we connected. And we're like, okay, we can start the Fridays for Future chapter in India. And we also found Amrita, who also wanted to start it in Bangalore. That's how we found her. Then later, Karen found someone from Delhi just through the internet. We all found each other on Instagram, I think. We were just posting and cross posting. Our friends were cross posting it. So we connected through mutual friends, and that's how we found each other. We weren't friends before this. We only found each other through this thing. I hadn't even seen any of them before, like the first climate strike where we met. So even though we organized the strike, we hadn't met each other before the strike itself. So yeah.
And so, how many active FFF members would you say there are now in India? There's
Um, Easily anywhere from 100 to 150. So I just know my team, since we are broken up to different teams and the coordinators explain, I can just say from their experience of what their team count is. So we would definitely have around 100 to 150. And this is just the India team, right? Uh, so from what I recall, there are 30 people just in research, and there are 10 people for outreach, so a few more people for partnerships. So we have different working groups and a few people who are coordinating those. So we have easily 100 to 150 people actively working on Fridays for Future India. For local chapters, I cannot comment because there is a lot of churn, right? Because this is a volunteer work. So in Bangalore, we have about 20 to 30 people who actively participate in organizing it. But people who actually partake can differ between thousands. So it really depends. But people who are actively organizing is definitely like around 20.
and of the active organizers, roughly what percent are women?
It's easily 85 to 90%. Okay, I'd say 80 to 85% are women. Because if there were a call of 10 people, there would be 2 men and like 8 women.
And why do you think that is globally, that young women are at the forefront?
I think women are more empathetic to understanding the situation, and I think women have generally led change. So when we see an issue, we definitely want to solve it. Um, which is interesting because I would normally expect the opposite because men have more resources, they're more privileged in India. So I would definitely expect them to act. But it's always been a majority of women in most of the climate movements. I honestly feel like it's women are affected more by the climate crisis just because of our perceived dependency. So I would definitely say that's the one of the reasons.
Hmm. Um, do you think of yourself as a feminist?
Oh yeah, I definitely think of myself as a feminist.
Mm-hmm. And do you? I think in India that's still like not a good word. I mean, it's like you must be a man hater, or have attitudes changed with young people?
This is very common. So if it's like a cringe thing to accept it. Oh my God, you're a feminist. Oh, you basically hate men. So that's definitely a very a common term. I think in so this incident happened to me in like 11th grade where I was talking to my teacher who was a man, and we were talking about feminism, and it was a group discussion where the entire class was involved, and he explained feminism as an issue where women want dominance over men. And when I argued, and it's women who want equal rights, he just shot me down. And this was the idea, and all the men in the group supported him. So there's a huge misconception that women want to be more dominant instead of just asking for equal rights.
Mm.
So yeah, feminism is a very frowned upon word. It's like yeah, it's like you're into witchcraft or something.
What gave you the courage to claim the label? Why are you brave when a lot of people, a lot of young women and men aren't?
Oh, it's very obvious to me because I've grown up seeing even in like I informal spaces. There has been so many times where men have spoken over me. I've been harassed on buses, and this is so normalized that it's very hurtful. I just see it in my own family where uh, patriarchy still exists, and it's very, very obvious. And it's a huge problem, and we really need to address it because it's affecting every single woman. And why would I not want the same rights as a man? uh, it's not something we should be asking for in the first place. It's something that should have we should have been born with. So it always makes me sad that this is something we have to fight for. Because to me, it seems like a very very obvious choice, but it isn't. It's and the amount of women who uplift men because of societal conditioning and structural violences, because women have been conditioned to feel like men are the superior being. And because this has happened throughout a prolonged period of time, they've come to accept this. And they degrade themselves and they uplift men. So if a woman were to have two children, like say a son and a daughter, I think in a lot of situations, no matter how educated she is, she will always there's always toxic masculinity taught to the boys. It's just ingrained in the Indian society, and it's very obvious. It's very obvious in a lot of ways, and just in just daily life. I think that's really why I want equal rights.
Hmm. May I ask if your parents had an arranged marriage or a love marriage?
Oh, it was definitely arranged. My parents are definitely religious. Yeah, love marriage would be frowned upon in my family. I don't think anyone in my family's had a love marriage.
And have they worked out, or do they just suffer in silence?
Luckily, they have worked out, but I don't think that's the case for a lot of families. Because yeah, they do suffer. A lot of families don't work out, and they do have to suffer in silence because it's to a point it's dangerous for women to accept that like this is not working out because chance there's a very high chance of her parents frowning upon her and disowning her, and uh, there might be no financial support. The only cases I've seen where a woman has been able to break away from her from the marriage if it wasn't working out, if she was financially independent.
Yeah, yeah.
And so it's very important to educate women and train get make them financially stable.
When I was in India, I met two brothers, and they were researching marriage partners for their sister, who is a physician. And they had a point system. They'd interview the guy, they'd do his astrological chart, they talk to family and friends about him. So it's not a random process. So there's something to be said for doing research like that in a person you're supposed to live with the rest of your life.
Oh yeah, there's a lot of research that goes into it. I think for my family particularly, the first factor is religion and caste. So, and the second would be his qualification, and then they would consult families and extended friends about um, his behavior and how he is as a person, uh, qualitative terms of who he as a person, who he is as a person. After that, financial stability is an absolute must. Um, and the next process would be to see the astrological charts and see if the families work together. So there's a lot of I don't think I would ever understand how you marry someone you barely know, because a lot of times they aren't given the space to get to know each other. Or luckily in my family, I think that they definitely ask for my consent, and there will be time period where I will be allowed to get to know him. And they do seem to be open for me finding someone as long as he's in the same caste and religion, which is interesting because I'm atheist and they don't know that, or they wouldn't accept it.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, so that's yeah, it's really weird.
Wait, do you have brothers and sisters?
No, I'm an only child.
Well, that's interesting. Uh, I'm looking for birth order and patterns in the activists that I'm interviewing, and a fair
Hmm.
amount are firstborn and only children, which a lot of times that leads to achievers because they get all the parents' attentions and expectations.
Hmm.
Um, Go ahead.
No, go ahead, please.
When you're doing organizing, to go back to that, an issue that I hear a lot about that's an old issue in liberal activist groups is how do you be efficient, get things done without spending enormous amount of time, without having like a military military hierarchy with bosses and subordinates. So the question is, how do you get things done in a democratic way without spending huge amounts of time?
Oh, okay. This was definitely an issue with us because we don't have a lot of active working members, right? Initially, when we started out, so the working members who were really active didn't want the opinion of people who weren't active, and so yeah, we did face that issue. But I think we eventually decided that we don't get to decide whose opinions matters and whose opinion like they don't. So we normally just have a general meeting where we set the agenda and anyone is free to add on to the agenda on what they want to discuss. And we normally just have a poll, like an anonymous poll in the meeting. Uh, we use technology for this to enable no personal bias. And that's how we really settle on things. And there are working groups. Normally, people, again, this is again voted on. Anyone who wants to take up responsibility can stand for positions of coordinators. I wouldn't say it's fully not hierarchical because there is hierarchy between people who are more active and who aren't. I don't think it's completely possible to have a flat structure when there are people, say, there's one person spending, say, 5 hours of a day. You can't expect them to have a higher, like a more lead on the topic than someone who's spending like 1 hour a day on that particular topic. So there is hierarchy, but at least it's democratic and it's voted upon, and all decisions at the end of the day aren't made by the elected person. They are voted upon in the groups. They just are in charge of organizing it and making sure that everyone's voices are heard, which is
Do,
how we settle on it.
do you vote by like putting on a piece of paper or electronically, or how do you vote in a meeting?
So we generally have Zoom meetings where if we're on a call, we generally have a Zoom meeting. There's a polling option for the Zoom Pro. That's how we vote it out if we're on a call. If not, we use Slack for organizing. Slack has a lot of add-on apps. So we just have the Slack poll app, sorry, the simple poll app, and we just vote anonymously on that.
So if you're in a face-to-face meeting, you could just use the same software on someone on your phones.
Yes, that's right. That's what we do.
Mm. And do you ever have trouble with talkers, with people who like to talk and be heard, and they take up too much time?
Surprisingly, we haven't had that issue except like once. But we really encourage that because that shows that they're interested. So even if they're taking up too much time, it's completely fine. We've only had this issue once, so we were kind of happy because it just meant that they cared a lot. So we took it in a positive way, and we just agreed to a lot of their points, even though a lot of it couldn't like a lot of people didn't understand what they were saying. But they did definitely work on it. So it was a nice experience because we took it in a positive manner.
When you strike, is it at school? Is it in a public place? Is it with placards? What's the public presentation of the strike?
So we usually strike in front of the parliament, or in case of our capital, we strike in front of the Ministry of Environment. So we strike with placards. A lot of our strikes are also educational because I think one of our main aim in strikes is to include marginalized communities in our strikes because apart from environmental defenders and indigenous activists who are on ground protecting their land, most of marginalized communities that dwell in cities aren't aware of the issue. So we go to their areas and try to get them to come to the strikes if possible. If not, we hold strikes in their areas with the local authorities in their areas so that we make it accessible to them by going to them instead of asking them to come somewhere else. So even when they do travel to us, I think this one time we were able to collaborate with an NGO that works specifically with children for education of marginalized children. So they're a very big NGO in India, and we had the opportunity to get all schools from that schools that were under them. So in that session, we had climate scientists come in and talk in the local language about the issue while holding placards, so that at the end of the day, they were able to understand why they were striking and why this is a relevant issue. So we try to make the strikes as educational as possible, and we also put forth why we're striking and why this is what our demands are, so that they can understand the cause of it and not just the cause and like what we want the outcome of the strike.
By marginalized communities, is that like poor slum dwellers, low caste, outcast, Muslims, indigenous tribal people? All of those are what you would think of as marginalized?
Yes, definitely. In Bangalore, we don't have indigenous activists because Bangalore, which is the city I'm in, it's the capital of the state. It's a very tech-driven city, so we don't have any indigenous activists here. I wouldn't consider Muslims as marginalized communities because uh, they are treated like marginalized communities by the government, but they're quite large in number. Uh, I think the definition varies and is very subjective. But yeah, they are in the smaller section of the society. So I would consider them a smaller section of society, but definitely not marginalized.
And what kind of reaction do you get if you go to a low income school or whatever? Do people say, oh, it's God's will, there's nothing we can do? Do they say, what are their reactions? What do they want to know?
Uh, they're actually very open to learning about it. And we've always received a positive response because we usually work with children, and children are very curious about what's happening in it. I think they we try to keep whatever we explain very children friendly and kid friendly. So they've all been very welcoming, and they really are. So I think the conditioning happens where they believe it's God's will once they grow up. When they're children, they're still open to learning about things. So we've always been perceived positively, and science has definitely taken over any beliefs they might have.
Mm. And when you say kids friendly, does that mean skits, drama, plays, music, dancing? What's kids friendly?
So we definitely have a lot of skits about the climate crisis. We also have a little. I think what works really well is videos. So we have a lot of videos that we work with, and they're all in local languages so that they can understand. Uh, so it's also really entertaining for them to learn from a video because it shows like it has these little animated things which are really fascinating to children.
Mm-hmm. Do those children have in the slums have TV in their homes or access to TV?
It really, I some of them do, but a lot of them don't. It depends on which category, but a lot of them do have phones. So if they're in the city, like in Bangalore, they have access to internet. It might be limited. It's not like it's not streaming internet and it's not super fast internet, but they have access to limited internet and a phone. I'm not so sure of a TV. I'm not so sure of a TV.
Hmm. Um, when you think about where we are, why do you think it is that young people, Generation Z, are able to take leadership in a way that previous generations didn't take leadership? Is it because of social media, or why is this generation so outspoken?
Um, I think protests have been going on in India for quite some time. I think our independence was attained by peaceful protests, right?
That's
So,
Gandhi.
yeah, yeah. And so for Indians, protests are very predominant, and in the Indian context, as far as like growing up, I've seen a lot of protests taking place for humanitarian rights and religious issues. So I don't think there was social media does make it easier now, but it's always been it's very ingrained with us.
When I'm thinking of when Gandhi led like the Salt March to the sea, the boycott, um, he was surrounded by a lot of young people who helped him. Right? He was pretty old,
Mhm.
but a lot of his helpers were young.
Yeah. So I think we have a common misconception that Gandhi led the entire thing. There were a lot of freedom fighters who weren't in the popular media that were actively partaking in this. Um, Ambedkar is a great example. And so a lot of people organized it, and to be saying it's just one person is pretty much how we're glorifying Greta right now. A lot of people do it. Just I'm not saying Greta doesn't deserve the attention she gets, but she definitely does. She started a movement, but it's also important to recognize that there are several other people who started this, and I think Indigenous people were truly the first like the first uh, set of communities that started the fight against the climate crisis.
Mm. When I think of indigenous activists, the ones who are most subject to violence and killed for their work, they're so powerful. I think of South America, Central America, um, um, Australia. Where else do you think of indigenous activists who were early pioneers in fighting for the environment?
So even in India, a large population, nearly 8% of our population is indigenous communities, but the reason is they don't have access to internet and they aren't easily accessible to the rest of the population. They're called Adivasis, and they have different community names, and some communities are called Idu Mishimi. I could be pronouncing that wrong, but these are people who've been fighting from the start. Not not so much so as the Americans, because I think they had a problem of petroleum from before we did, but coal has been a problem in India because we have really rich untapped coal mines, and even today, Coal India Limited is one of the largest coal uh, companies in the world, and they have been destroying a lot of uh, have like biodiversity, and people have been fighting that from on ground.
Hmm. Who else do you think of as early pioneering leaders in the climate movement, like before Greta?
Um, I don't think I want to take one. There was this one person, I think she was from the Philippines. She worked actively for the climate movement. I'm not sure how to pronounce her name. I think I might spell it wrong as well. But she was pioneering for the climate movement from the start. But since there was a lot of racism in the climate movement even from before, her voice wasn't amplified. Her op-ed actually came out very, very recently in Teen Vogue, I think. Um, and there's always this racism even today in the climate movement where people of color and indigenous people or black people are just used for representation. It's tokenism at the end of the day. And I've personally felt it like, oh, okay, there's one person of color and one person from the global south, so we're good, there's enough representation. And so I feel like sometimes they just do it for having representation and not actually caring about having our voices heard.
Hmm. Um, have you been to international gatherings like for for the UN or for Fridays for the Future, where you've met international activists?
No, I haven't been to any of the UN or the Fridays for Future gatherings because a lot of them are in Europe, and so far there hasn't been any a huge climate event or conferences in Asia, which always makes it harder for you to get funding to go for those or either fund yourself, which is very hard. So I haven't been to any of them. Even from India, I think there was just one person, one or two people that I know that they were able to go to the COP25 last year. So again, it's very hard for us to even like go into these conferences.
Hmm. Well, that's a huge issue then, because we know the global south is most harmed by climate change, which is most produced by the global north. So obviously, it's really unfair to have the focus be in the global north.
It is, I agree.
My goodness. How does Fridays for Future communicate internationally? Do you have like Zoom calls or something where people talk to each other?
We have several organizing tools, and we're always connected on email, and we do have several Zoom meetings to discuss about what's happening in each other's countries and how we can support each other. There are a lot of self-organizing systems that we can reach out to. The Fridays for Future International movement is definitely connected to most of the cities and most of the countries that are active in.
And what kind of principles or organizing tools would you say are emphasized, and who's leading it? I mean, Greta can't lead a whole international movement by herself. Where are
Mhm.
the kind of principles stemming from?
So in Fridays for Future, we definitely in Fridays for Future International is where the flat structure actually works because all of us do give the same amount of time for this because we are representing our country. So it's very important for us to be active on there. And when you're representing a country, it's someone you choose to, someone who's been active in the movement, you choose to represent. So we all communicate on different channels, be it Slack, be it Telegram, be it WhatsApp, or be it email, right? So we have always been able to connect each other on that. Different like different countries have different representatives. Sometimes it's just one person, sometimes it's more than one. We have different working groups for different issues, and it's very easy to connect to the working groups because there's sufficient transparency to allow you to reach out to different working groups, and you can reach out to them. Say you have something going on in your country that you would want the social media team to highlight, so you can reach out to the social media team and work with them to highlight it. So we do have a flat structure in Fridays for Future International.
Are there like older advisors that I know Greta refers to scientists that she consults from time to time? Is there uh, like older people or experienced activists that are somehow helpful, or is it strictly youth run?
So Fridays for Future movement initially started out as a youth-led movement, but since more adults wanted to join, it became a people's movement. So we're open to people of all ages, but largely, I think from the working groups, a lot of people are young people. We don't have any advisors as such. We do consult experts like scientists. We reach out to scientists for say different webinars so that we can educate ourselves, and we have meetings with scientists to understand the climate crisis better. But we don't have any adult advisors as such.
In terms of specific demands or goals, you're
Mhm.
striking for what? To have an end to dependency on fossil fuel? Or what would you say are the priority goals and demands? What do you want?
So Fridays for Future International doesn't have one set of goals. Before, our primary goal was to declare climate emergency, but we noticed that a lot of countries that did declare climate emergency didn't act on it. So that's when we decided that we simply want climate justice, which means that the government prioritizes climate action and ecological sustainability above all else. And we don't have set demands because we want to make it's like different demands work for different countries because in India, one of our demands is for the government to acknowledge the climate crisis because our government currently doesn't believe that it is a serious issue or it is even an issue. So for
Wow.
them to acknowledge that yes, this is a crisis is one of our demands. But this wouldn't be a demand in some European countries like say France or something, where climate change is at least acknowledged as an issue. So uh, countries are allowed to have their own demands.
Mm-hmm. Um, when you think about the future, are you optimistic or pessimistic? Because the problems seem so insurmountable, and the dominance of fossil fuel is so invasive. How do you proceed fighting against such a giant?
I'm personally for my country, I'm not very optimistic because it's uh, the amount of violations and the amount of environmentally destructive projects that the government themselves approve, especially during the lockdown, we have a huge deforestation problem right now because the Ministry of Wildlife, sorry, not the Ministry, the National Board for Wildlife has been approving so many deforestation projects. So it's very scary because we definitely need the government to change, but at the end of the time, there's no existing ruling parties that are also capable of leading an environmental or tackling the climate crisis. So when there's no one eligible to do this, it's very scary because you don't have anyone to put your hopes on. So unless there is someone who starts it or someone new who's coming up, there is no existing party that has ecological sustainability as one of their priorities.
Wow. What, the Congress Party doesn't either?
Oh no, no, definitely not.
Wow. There was a new party that started up for a while in Delhi. I've forgotten what it was called, but it was a progressive party that got elected for a while and then it kind of faded out. I don't remember the name of it.
Oh yeah, that was Aam Aadmi Party, but
Yeah.
the issue with Aam Aadmi Party is that they're only central to Delhi. They're not in any other cities. So they won't be able to. Yeah, they definitely are very progressive, and if there was one party you'd pick, it definitely has to be Aam Aadmi Party. But they're not in every other state, so if they won't be able to make a political shift in all the cities across India. So unless they spread, and it, not to subscribe to ideological purity, but there are several issues with Aam Aadmi Party as well. But it's definitely better than other political parties.
A big issue in the US is that young people who tend to be liberal and progressive don't vote. So the old Trump kind of guys can get elected. Is that an issue in India or not?
Uh, Definitely, a lot of people do not vote, even though they're eligible for voting, which is why Modi, the Modi government exists. And a lot of, like, I think the Modi government was really able to capture the audience. So quite a few young people also, conservatives, do support him. So he really has a way with words. So a lot of people do support him, which is why a very similar situation to the US.
So sad. Um, so, and this is kind of changing the subject, but the first and second waves of the women's movement were really influenced by books. They really stirred the popular imagination, like Betty Friedan's book, The Feminine Mystique. I wonder if there are books that have influenced you and people that you know in the climate movement, or if it's mostly social media that people rely on for information.
Uh, I think for me personally, it was personal experience that influenced me. But yes, a lot of people are influenced by books, but I wouldn't say I was.
Mm-hmm. Um, how do you keep from burnout? Because organizing and working takes a toll. What do you do for fun? How do you keep from giving up in the face of the depressing situation in India and the world?
Um, Honestly, I think I've been burnt out several times. I think I do try to take a break and like focus on other things. Like I personally really enjoy cooking. I think it's very calming for me, and I enjoy reading. But I think I've always had a really hard time staying away because it's such a such a personal issue because it's happening to me and it's an issue I deal with every day. So I can't stop fighting for it. So yeah, I'm not very good with that because I keep getting burned out, but I don't stop to take a break. So I don't think I'm the best to advise on that.
Yeah, a lot of climate activists get trolls and negative, hurtful comments. Do you face that in India, or they don't even care enough to troll?
They don't care enough to troll. We haven't. I think trolls are the least of our worries, and I don't think we've ever. Yeah, it's never been very. I think one or two comments on a social media post, but it's never been a predominant, like a very dominant issue.
Oh, that's interesting. That's helpful in a way.
Yeah.
Is there anything else that you would like to add in terms of how to be an effective organizer? Why young people and young women are such strong voices? Anything that that we haven't talked about that should be included?
Um, I think one way to be an effective organizer is just to have really transparent communication channels. That way, everyone can get involved. Um, so I think FF Digital does that really well. So the minute you join in one of their communication channels, you know exactly what's going on. You know exactly where you can partake. So to encourage more people to join and become organizers, it's very important to have transparent communication channels and like a self-organizing structure so that it it's important to acknowledge that you will get burnt out so that you really need to eliminate key man risk.
And that requires access to social media to do all that transparency, right? So it leaves out people who don't have access to social media.
Un- Unfortunately, it not necessarily social media, but you definitely need access to technology, uh, which is definitely a negative point. Yeah.
Um, so when you're trying to get the message out to a rural area, it sounds like you've mostly focused on educating children, but I'm wondering if the adults get educated in the process as well.
We do try to reach out, but they aren't as open. But we do work with NGOs that are already working in the rural areas just because their resources and their outreach is way more efficient, right? So it's always about maximizing impact. So it doesn't, as long as someone who's doing it better than us, it's always better to reach out to people and seek their advice because it's a collaboration goes a long way in having a huge impact. So that's
Right.
what we always do.
Right, that makes sense. So you work with a project to make food from vegetable sources. What does that mean?
So all our food is plant-based, so we don't have any animal products or animal ingredients. I'm personally vegan. Um, I just want to make plant-based nutrition affordable and accessible to more people. Because honestly, vegan alternatives are very, very expensive, and people who can go vegan or aren't, they don't know about the nutritional content. So to me, I'm very passionate about making plant-based food affordable and accessible. But I don't believe in shaming people who aren't vegan because there are a lot of reasons for them not to be. So, but I do want to, a place I want to contribute to, which is why I like working where I do.
And do you use soy as the base, or what is the base, or just vegetables, or what's the base for the food?
We use peanuts, we use oats. Yeah, we do have soy in one, but it's mainly oats, cashews, and peanuts. And yeah, they're all locally sourced.
And do you have like veggie burgers, or how is the food presented?
So it's mostly plant-based dairy. So we don't have patties because burgers aren't a very common food in India. So it's more about dairy, which is a very very huge it's a very huge industry in India. So it's more about that and yogurts and other dairy products like mayonnaise and butter, which is very integral to the Indian culture. So it's making that affordable and accessible because a lot of vegan alternatives aren't affordable and are accessible, which is really the point.
Hmm. Do you have like a cookbook that you've put together or something?
Not at the moment, no.
That sounds like a project for you. So that
It definitely sounds interesting. Yeah.
if you do it, let me know and I'll spread the link to your ebook vegan.
Sure, I will do that. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you. Goodbye.
Goodbye. Have a good day.